Lily. All right. Hello, 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 everyone. My name is Jocelyn Jones, and I am the founder of Faith on the Journey, and I'm also the author of the book Breaking the Power of the Mask. And if this is your first time tuning in, I just want to welcome you to the family. And I use that word intentionally because that's what we are, a family. We're a community that is here to help you strengthen your faith, to heal the broken pieces of your heart, and to be that place where you can go to knowing that you're not alone in your struggles. That's the thing. Sometimes we can go through some very challenging moments in our lives and we feel like no one understands. But you don't have to be alone on your journey, and we want to be here for you. And if you've been following along for the last month, we had an amazing series that we just finished up on grief and loss. We had some dynamic speakers who touched on complicated grief and loss. We talked about grief due to someone dealing with memory loss. We talked about grief from divorce, and we're going to continue to dive into issues like that. And if you missed our grief series, do not worry. You can catch up to speed by visiting our YouTube channel. And we also have a free grief resource guide available for you to check out at faithonthejourney.org. Again, that is faithonthejourney.org. But today we're actually kicking off a new series, a series called Breaking the Shackles of Shame and Condemnation. And this is something that is so near and dear to my heart because for many years, I struggled with shame and condemnation. I just felt like the devil was just using me as his punching bag, just hitting me with the right fist, the left fist, and I'm just taking it because at the end of the day, I really did not understand what my value and my identity was based upon. I thought for the longest that my value and my identity was based on what I accomplished, what I did. And here's the thing about this that sets you up for a fall because yes, you might have moments in your life where you accomplish great things and you might hold your chest up high like, yes, I did that. And sometimes you can become prideful, which the Bible speaks against when that happens. But then there's those times, those seasons in your life where you fall short, where you might fail. And when you base your value and your identity on what you do and what you accomplish, when you fail, instead of saying, oh man, I failed, let me learn from that experience, you start to believe that you are a failure. And that's how the devil works. He likes to associate who you are based on your circumstances. He likes to point fingers and say, yes, you did mess up. You are a failure. Oh, yes, this happened to you. You were abused as a child. So you are dirty. You are discarded. He likes to say things like, oh, yes, you have a mental illness. So yes, something's wrong with you. You can't accomplish your dreams. You have a learning disorder. You're stupid. He likes to point fingers. He likes to label us. But let me tell you something. No one can label us or define us other than our Creator. Only the Creator can name and identify His creation. And so we need to hold on to that. And it doesn't matter what mistakes that we might have made in our past, God still has chosen us. He will never abandon us. I think about something my mom used to always say. Actually, she still says this to this day. She'll say, Jocelyn, I don't care how old you get, you will always be my baby. And I'm like, okay, I'm good and grown, but she's still calling me her baby. But she's saying that because she wants me to know that I'm hers. Just like God says that about us, that I don't care how old you get. It's not just that, but I don't care what you've done. I don't care who did what to you. I don't care what people say about you. At the end of the day, you're still mine. You're still chosen. I still have a purpose and a destiny for you. And so our identity is not wrapped up in what we do or what the world says about us. We don't have the scarlet X because of the things that we have done in our past, the shortcomings that we have. God still calls us chosen. And so today, as we kick off this series on shame and condemnation, I really wanted to touch on an important subject as relates to the time that we're in today, because so many people right now have been exposed to insurmountable levels of trauma and pain and loss, and there's a bunch of feelings that we're dealing with around that subject, and people are dealing with depression, and they're struggling with anxiety, and they might feel shame around those things. And then there's our brothers and sisters out here right now who are struggling struggling with a mental illness, but certain things we just don't talk about, right? We just say, oh, there's something a little different about Uncle Johnny, but we're not going to talk about the fact that he might be struggling with a mental illness because there's shame associated with that. And so today we're going to actually bring someone on who is an expert in her field. And I was so blessed to meet her at a conference. We're going to bring on Dr. Jessica Brown to the show. And this woman is pretty dynamic. I'm just saying. And I'm going to talk about your book in just a second, but let me just
Okay.
bring people up to speed on who you are. You are a counseling psychologist who has served as assistant professor of counseling and practical theology at Samuel DeWitt Proctor School of Theology in Virginia. That's great. And she's also a licensed clinical psychologist who has her own private practice that's very successful. And she recently published a book called Making Space at the Well. And I have my copy. I'm going to make sure to bring this up to show you all. That book was excellent. And I think everyone
Thank
needs
you.
that book on their bookshelf. And so we are so excited for you to be on the show with me, just to have this very real conversation about what people are dealing with at this time. And so welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, yes. So I am very curious, Dr. Brown.
hmm
If let's start off with just finding out what inspired you to write your book.
Sure. So I'll say this. I have known that my call in the world was kind of the intersection of faith and mental health for quite some time. I joke that I'm a translator. So I am a church baby. My father was a pastor. My mother is a pastor. So I am Black church through and through. And one of the things that I saw just in growing up was that as you were saying earlier, we don't have the language to talk about some of the things that are plaguing us. We use, um, we talk about generational curses or demons, and it's not to say that demon possession isn't real. Of course, we know that's a real spiritual phenomenon. But in the church, I think, especially in the Black church, we take very literally, Jesus is my all in all, to the point that we don't understand that some of the things we're struggling with, we need support that we might find outside the church. And so I was always very clear from the time I went to college that a part of my work was um, going to learn the quote unquote other stuff, the psychology stuff, and helping the church folks to understand it, to put it in language that we can make sense of. A part of that was really watching my dad get depressed. And he was a pastor who was very well educated, who had a best friend who was a psychologist. And even in our family, we didn't know how to talk about the fact that he had major depression. We just didn't have the language for it. And so a part of my mission is to not have families who don't have the language. Like we have to overcome the stigma, but we at least can find the words to talk about it. And for me, ultimately, that's about giving language to the people who are suffering and for so long have thought it was because God didn't love them or they weren't praying hard enough or they just weren't doing the right things. And it's so contrary to what we know about God that I think it's important that we kind of take that mantle up and carry it to the corners of the earth.
That's awesome. Yes. We've heard that before in church that if you have enough faith, you wouldn't be
hmm
depressed.
hmm
Not realizing that sometimes it really could be a chemical imbalance that's taking place. That
hmm
person actually might need medication, and it's okay. There's no shame in that. But I remember reading in your book, in the introduction of the book, actually, I'm going to read an excerpt because this was so good. So we just gonna talk about this real quick. It says, we develop code words to cover up psychotic breaks, suicide, or manic episodes. We say that family members are not feeling well when they really haven't been able to even get out of bed for weeks, right? We call suicides accidents to avoid the shame of admitting that a family member did not feel like life was worth living. We excuse dysfunctional behavior saying, oh, that's just the way they are, rather than holding people accountable for seeking out help and becoming well. That was so powerful to me. because that spoke to the shame and the cover up that many of us are used to when it comes to the fact that we might be struggling, whether it's depression, it might be bipolar, it might be schizophrenia or whatever. But having that diagnosis, many of us say, ooh, if you label me, that means I'm not right and I don't want that label. So can you speak more to what you were saying in this excerpt?
Sure. So for me, it's kind of multi-layered, right? So there's a big cultural piece. One is we as Black folks, particularly in America, have carried so much on our backs for so long that our emotional issues have often taken a back burner, right? I mean, slavery, Jim Crow, even it's 2020 and Black folks, and not just Black folks, but people of color in general, right, are still at physical risk. And so for many of us, the idea of talking about our feelings has felt frivolous, has felt useless, has felt in some ways dismissive of all the things that we've overcome, right? Add to that for many years, for good reason, we have not been able to trust mental health and medical systems. And so then, if I do talk about my feelings, then what? you know? And so there's a reason that church really became our hub and our home base. But the problem has become, as we've been saying, that some of those spiritual messages that I firmly believe we intend to be encouraging actually have the opposite effect. So think about this, which I'm sure you've heard. You can't straddle the fence. If you're going to worry, don't pray. If you're going to pray, don't worry. I know you've heard it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, what happens if I have generalized anxiety disorder, though, and worrying is one of the main ways I process information, and I don't know how to stop and I can't control it? Now, is my church telling me I'm not faithful enough or I'm not a real believer because I can't stop the worry? Something simple like that, right? And so I think we've really got to interrogate those spiritual messages because we don't intend to shame people. But when we take a lot of those things out of context, the implicit message people get, and this is what shame is all about, right? The implicit message people get is you aren't good enough. And that's not a message that we as believers ever want to send to another believer. Everybody is good enough. Everybody is always good enough. But we sometimes accidentally communicate the opposite. And I think our code words and our code language is about our fear of believing, even being told maybe, that we don't belong. Because if I can't belong in church, then where can I belong? This is the place that everybody's supposed to be able to come. And for us as Black folks, sometimes it was the only place we could go. So to have that taken away from us is tragic. And so we do what we need to do to preserve it, even if it's based on a half truth.
That's really good. Yes. And I think that ties into your title so well because you
Hmm.
talk about making space at the well.
Hmm.
And you would think that the church, of all places, would be a safe space for someone to be honest about their struggles, but not so much, right?
You know, at times, I think some churches do a better job than others, but sometimes we let our humanness, we let the politics of church, we let the extent to which we extend the idea of Sunday best get the best of us. And so, one of the things I talk about in the book is that I don't believe that there's any church that isn't doing something right,
Right.
right? Like we're all doing something right, or else we would have shut down by now. But we also all have more to do. And the challenge is that for many of us, it's about at times suspending our natural human inclinations in order to really see what and who God is calling us to be in community.
Yeah, and you talked about stigma quite a bit, and I want you to
Hmm.
elaborate more on that stigma that someone might feel if they're dealing with a diagnosed mental illness, or they might feel like that right now they're struggling with depression?
Hmm. So, stigma in general is negative attitudes and beliefs related to a mental illness or a person who has a mental illness. Some examples of stigma might be things like people with mental illness are violent, or people with mental illness can't control themselves. People with mental illness are dangerous, or, oh, she can't do such and such because she has bipolar disorder or she has depression, right? So there are these negative attitudes that really shape the way we see other people, the way we interact with other people, and even the way we operate as communities. So it might have the effect of someone feeling left out, someone feeling shunned, and even the shame of feeling like I'm not good enough. I can't go to church because my mind doesn't work exactly the way it's supposed to work, right? And so when we talk about stigma, there are two main ways that we think about combating stigma: education and contact. Education is really telling the truth about mental illness. So in America, our best estimate is about 1 in 5 adults can meet criteria for a diagnosed mental health condition. 1 in 5. So if your church has 10 people in it, there are likely two who probably meet criteria for a mental health condition. Now, you might be thinking, I don't think so. I don't know of anybody in my church. That's right. It's just because you just don't know, right? Because the vast majority of people who meet criteria for a mental health condition are going to work, raising their children, living their lives, paying their bills, very high functioning, able to do all the things they need to do. And at the same time, they may have days when they have a hard time getting out of bed, or they might have a daily struggle with worrying so much that it's hard to make decisions. And we tend to think about, particularly as portrayed by the media, mental illness as being those on the extremes. But the reality is, the vast majority of lived experience with mental illness is everyday people doing everyday things, but those things are harder because of their symptoms. And so that's why it's so important as the church to really educate, because it's not those people over there who have mental health conditions. It's us. It's us. I learned when I was in graduate school that I have myself and 3 cousins on one side of my family are mental health practitioners, right? And so all of us independently in graduate school learned that we had a history of mental health conditions in our family. Nobody ever talked about it. So if we would go to a therapist, and the therapist would ask, anybody in your family have anxiety? Anybody in your family have depression? We would say no. But that wasn't true because our family did not have the language. And so I just imagine how powerful it would be. And, we've kind of been intentional in this generation and our kids of doing something different. But I just imagine how powerful it would be if somebody in our family had said, look, these are the things that we struggle with as a family. Just like diabetes runs in our family, and just like high blood pressure runs in our family, depression can also run in our family. And so here are the things that we can do to try to keep ourselves as healthy as possible, right? Because for me, number one, I would know my medical history, which is important. But number two, depression wouldn't have been the scary thing because now I know someone who has it. And I see that they're okay, right? They're not institutionalized. They're not in a straitjacket. They are living their life and they just have times when it's hard. And so maybe it would be okay for me if that were to happen, but I could also live my life and I could be okay. And sometimes things will be hard, right? So I think that second piece of contact is also so important because it helps us to build realistic expectations, both for ourselves and for others. It's not this mythical thing that's out there, but it's the people all around us who have struggles just like I have struggles. It makes it more tangible and it also makes it less scary.
That's really helpful because I think that many of us might have this idea of mental illness as something, like you said, the extremes. cases that might be overt, but many people who we love who are high functioning have it, and it's okay. It's not like something's wrong, with you. We all have our struggles, and I think especially when it comes to the issue of depression, which I would like for you to kind of speak to that a little bit more, because many
Mhm.
people right now who might be listening are finding themselves saying, man, I just don't feel right now. This is very heavy dealing with the times that we're in. So, can you talk to the listeners or viewers about depression and what they might be feeling?
Sure. So the primary feature of depression is sadness, just feeling kind of down, out of it. People might have crying spells. They might have trouble with sleep. One of the things that we see in people of color is more what we call somatic or bodily symptoms, headaches, stomach pains. Your body, some people will describe their body feeling like lead, just feeling like my body just feels heavy, right? People might have changes in their appetite. Maybe they're not eating as much as they usually do, or they can't stop eating. They might have trouble with their thoughts, trouble making decisions, trouble staying focused. There's kind of a wide variety. Other people might be kind of irritable and snappy, feel kind of angry. And so, of course, there's room for us to be responding to just something happening, right? All of us experience stress at times and might have what we call kind of situational stress. But when it lasts for longer than a couple of weeks, when it really our normal coping skills don't seem to work, when we feel really bad, when we aren't able to get things done that we normally get done, that is one of the signs that, okay, this might be something bigger and I really need to seek out some support.
That's good. So, seeking out support, that's something that many people might struggle with. Even
Hmm.
saying, I need help, might be scary for some people, especially if you might be someone who considers yourself to be a leader. You might be a pastor. You might be someone who's in the forefront. I'm supposed to have it all together, right? That kind of
Hmm.
ties into my book, Breaking the Power of the Mask. I talk about how we wear this mask like everything is okay, when in reality we got some stuff going on inside. And I need you, I'm saying that because if that's you, if you are someone who always presents yourself as being happy go lucky all the time, but deep down you are struggling, you don't have to keep this mask on. There is help available for you. And so, for that person, Dr. Brown, what would you say to them in terms of their next steps on getting the help that they need?
Sure. So I think one of the things that has historically been a barrier for us as believers is this idea that mental health treatment will be contrary to our faith, right? That a therapist might not understand, they might not be a believer themselves. And the great news is that that is not the case, right? I encourage people, especially ministers who have questions about those kinds of things, to seek out a therapist who does Christian counseling or identifies as a Christian, because one of the things that can be helpful is to be able to integrate our faith into the therapy process. And there are plenty of us who specialize in those kinds of things. There are several, well, let me say this. One of the best ways to start that process is a personal referral. Because if you know somebody who's been to a particular therapist, that gives you kind of a heads up in terms of knowing what the person is like. If you don't feel like you can get a personal referral, there are directories that you can go on, that you can search by zip code. You can search by religious orientation, by race, by gender, by insurance, and try to narrow that down in terms of who takes your insurance, who you think would meet your needs. Most of us will do a 10 or 15-minute consultation over the phone so you can ask questions that you have. And even if you decide to go to an appointment, that first appointment is still an interview. And so I think as clients, we can ask all the questions we need to ask to try to ensure that this person fits our needs and is able to help us. As clinicians, our responsibility is to try to help you to understand, here's what I think is going on with you. Here's how I think I can help. And it really is a collaborative process. It's about building a team and building a team that you feel like you can work on and the team can be productive. And so the more questions you can ask, the more information you can get about that person, the better it is. And then it's your responsibility to be as honest as possible. If something rubs you the wrong way, let them know. If you have questions about something, let them know. The goal for all of us is to help the client to tap into and discover their own strength and their own ability to be an active part of the healing process. And so clients can facilitate that process by opening up as much as you can, even if that's to say in the beginning, look, I'm really scared and there's some things I'm not ready to tell you yet. That's okay, right? It's about building that honest, collaborative relationship. And so the good news is that there are so many of us who really specialize in working with believers and helping us to integrate our faith and mental health so we don't have to choose.
That's great. Yeah, and I love how you said building your team.
Hmm.
It's about having the right community. And from personal experience, because I am a believer in counseling, so I definitely believe everybody needs to be on somebody's couch.
Hmm.
And but I know that certain therapists weren't a good fit for you, and it's nothing wrong. It doesn't mean they're a bad therapist. Just means that they're probably not the best fit for you. And so I like how you said we need to interview people to make sure that we have that connection. So that is very helpful information as it relates to depression. But I want to go deeper around this subject because I know that some people who I've encountered with, that depression is so strong on them, is getting to the point where they're questioning if life is worth it.
Hmm.
And when you start questioning life and you start having suicidal thoughts, this gets to the point where it's like, okay, we might need some intervention. So I want you to kind of talk to that person right now who is beginning to questioning if life is worth it.
Sure. So the first thing I would say is that you might feel like you're all alone, but it's not uncommon for people to have these thoughts. It is a sign that you're feeling hopeless, that you're not sure where to turn. But we also know that God did not create you for nothing. And so when those thoughts come up, it's so important to seek support as soon as you can. Even if you don't know the words to say, even if you don't know how to describe what's going on with you, send somebody a text, call somebody on the phone, ask somebody if you can come over, call a hotline, seek out that support because those feelings most of the time are temporary. And if we wait them out, they will lessen and they will go away. The key is to remember that that temporary feeling is not emblematic. It's not the whole story of everything that's going on in your life. It's just a sign that you need help and you need it right now. And so, if you do nothing else for yourself, seek out that support whenever you can. I'm a big proponent of hotlines because sometimes, especially suicide, is something that people are really afraid to talk to their family and friends about because there can be so much shame associated with it. But it can be so helpful to call a hotline and just have another person to talk to until you wait out that intensity of that feeling and you can come back into control of your thoughts. It's usually temporary, not to say that it doesn't feel bad because it feels terrible, but it's usually because things feel really bad right then. And if you wait it out, maybe until the next day, things feel a little better and some of that hope will return.
That's good. Yeah, yeah, that's so real too because when you're in it, it just feels like there is no hope.
Yeah,
But
it does.
just that text or that phone call. I remember I was going through a really difficult time and I called one of my girlfriends on the phone. I was driving. I couldn't even see through the tears while I was driving. I should have pulled over. And when I called and she picked up, I couldn't even get words out. It was
Hmm.
like just struggling to say something and just getting out the words, I need you. I need help. There's people who they love you so much they'll do whatever they need to get to you in those moments. And so just reaching out, just knowing that you are loved, that you matter, that God made you with a purpose is
Hmm.
what we need you to hear right now if you're struggling with that, so that you can get beyond that extreme pain and find your way through whatever that moment is onto hope, because there's always hope.
Always,
So I
always.
appreciate that. But I've also, sadly, especially in the Chicagoland area, we recently had the loss of a Chicago police officer to suicide.
Mm.
And people were devastated by that. And the idea of someone taking their life, whether it was this case or anyone that we've lost due to suicide, it does something to a person who knows them. You know, you have the grief from the person passing away, but then you also have the shame and condemnation that you might
Hmm.
feel because you say, how did I not know? How did I not know about this? So, can you speak to that if someone is now carrying this burden of the loss of someone who they've had take their life due to suicide?
Sure. So I think you're right. Often there's a lot of guilt and questions about what could I have done? What did I miss? The truth is, because there's so much stigma and shame, sometimes people don't talk about what's going on with them. As believers, we know that our relationships with people don't end when they die, right? So we believe in the permanence of the spirit. We believe that those connections with people continue. And so one of the things we can do is think about ways to honor the person's memory, right? People who die by suicide are hopeless. They feel hopeless, and that's why they get to the point where they take their own lives. And so, one of the ways we can try to combat those feelings is number one, by talking about it, because they're certainly not the only ones who experience it, but also thinking about what are the ways I can instill hope in the world around me. I wasn't able to save this person I loved. And frankly, maybe they didn't want to be saved, but I can also share and peddle hope in the world around me. I can be a support for people who might need it. I can be someone who other people know that they can come to. And when I'm feeling down or alone, I can reach out for support in the hopes that I don't end up in that hopeless place. A lot of people, I've one of the unfortunate parts of my job is sitting with people who are experiencing that hopelessness. And often people get to a place where they worry that they are a burden to their family. And we can combat that. That's something that we can fight against on a daily basis. When we know that someone is struggling, we can remind them, hey, I love you. I'm here for you. I will always be here. And here's how I can show you. Because it can be so hard to forget that when you're in despair and when you feel all alone. And as much as we can remind people of that, the people who are still with us and the people who are still around, we can gradually break the cycle of death by suicide. We can learn to forgive ourselves and even learn to forgive people who elected to take their own lives. Because the reality is, you hear sometimes people say things like, oh, that's a selfish decision or something like that. Often it's not about selfishness at all. It's really about their belief that they might be sparing the people they love. And so we can forgive ourselves and also forgive them and really work to instill hope wherever we are.
Amen. Amen. Yes, and that's what we're trying to do through this broadcast. So I hope that you receive it if you're struggling right
Mm-hmm.
now. We want you to reach out for help. We want to make sure if you haven't already to subscribe to our email list, faithonthejourney.org, and we'll be sending you different resources throughout your week to encourage you so that you don't have to feel like you're alone. So
Mm-hmm.
I encourage you to subscribe. But as we continue, one of the things I want to talk about is not only mental illness, but good mental health. How do
Mm-hmm.
we foster that and create a community where we care for each other's mental health and well being?
So first, let me tell you kind of what I think about mental health. So for me, mental health is good awareness and management of your emotions, um, good relationships, good stress management, and good sense of self. Right. So when people feel like those things are under control, for me, that is a sign of good mental health. The things we do to manage our mental health or to maintain our mental health are different given the person because we're all fearfully and wonderfully made, right? We have individual makeups. And so we have some individuality there. But in general, we need to take care of our bodies. That means sleeping, exercising, nutrition. We need connection. We need relationships with other people. We need fun. We need play. We need intellectual stimulation. And for those of us who identify as believers, we also need spiritual grounding. We need, and I like to think about it as an anchor, something that keeps us in one place, even if we feel swayed by life circumstances, because all of us will have those times. And so I like to think about imagine having this long list of mental health things that you can do, right? You can go for a walk, you can call a friend, you can cook your favorite meal, you can do a puzzle, you can do a meditation and grounding exercise while you're doing your devotional experiences. You can pray, you can journal. So I like to think about having all this list of things that we know are helpful to us, and then imagine that they're in a basket that you can pull them out when you need them. So, good mental health is filling your basket. It is knowing here are all the things that help me to feel better. And for many of us, that is kind of an exploration process because we don't always even pay attention to ourselves enough to know here are the things that stress me out and here are the things that help me. So, I invite all of us to spend some time just doing some self reflection. What makes me feel happy and excited and energized? What makes me feel sad or down or irritable? And it's okay. We can't get rid of those sad or down or irritable feelings necessarily, but we can learn how to cope with them so they don't take over our lives. And good mental health is really being able to balance the good with the bad and knowing if I'm feeling a certain way, here are the things I can do to help myself and support myself.
That's great. Yeah, when you said having time for play and fun, that's something that I really have to work on. I said, "Ooh,
Mhm.
I'm pretty bad about that." But we find ourselves in this circular pattern of just doing the same thing over and over again, and we might be
Yes.
working, we might be doing great things with the family or a church, but having that time for self-care, that's the buzzword, self-care, self-care. Many of us don't even know
Yes.
how. We don't even know where to
Yes.
start. And with COVID, especially with us being in quarantine, some of us are now stuck in the house with our family. We might love them, but we don't love them to the point where we want to be with them 24/7 all the time. And we
Mhm.
struggling. So maybe there's some creative ways that people can explore to care for themselves, to have fun, to fill up their basket, even during times like this.
Sure. So play is not just for kids, right? Play is for grown-ups too. I think those of us with kids, our kids are trying to teach us how to remember that we can play. And so listen to your kids. But it could be something as simple. In our house, we like to do puzzles, we like to paint, we go outside and swing, we do Play-Doh. It could be something silly, something relaxing, something that you wouldn't normally do. Um, but I like to think about play as giving your brain a break. I'm really good at being an adult. Like I've figured it out for the most part. It's hard sometimes, but I can get it. But that doesn't mean there isn't a part of me that needs some freedom and some time to stretch and just be. And so that might be reading, it might be something artistic, it might be going for a walk, it might be sitting in my backyard and watching the trees sway in the wind, right? It doesn't have to be this complicated thing, it doesn't have to cost money, but it is about giving yourself an opportunity to step away from the hustle and bustle of life, right? For many of us, play can be dance, it could be watching a funny movie. There's so many opportunities, and it's our responsibility to engage those. I teach a class at the seminary called SelfCare as a spiritual practice. And one of the frames we use for that class is that self care is stewardship. And so I have them conjure this image of, let's say, somebody gives them a really nice gift for their birthday. And it's a person who's around them all the time, so they can kind of see how they're treating the gift. And the person watches them trash the gift, mistreat it, leave it places, it gets dirty, it's not cared for. And then imagine that that is God giving you your life, watching you trash it. And so for me, that image conjures, yes, I belong to me and I'm accountable to me. But how dare I say that God gifted me, that God loved me so much, that God created me and knows how many hairs I have on my head, and then dare to mistreat myself in such a way? What does that say about what I think about the gift God gave me? So that frame is helpful for me because it holds me accountable, right? That self care isn't just this thing that I do for me, but it's also one of the ways that I honor God and show God that I appreciate the gift that I've been given.
Amen. That just ministered to my whole soul. Thank you for that. Yes, and I hope you receive that out there. If any of you are like me, who sometimes put myself last because I'm
Hmm.
focused on serving others, but we can't do that. We have to care for this vessel that God gave us. So I appreciate this time that we've had, and I know people are going to want to know how to get in touch with you and get your book. So tell us about that.
Sure. So the book is called, again, Making Space at the Well. It's Ministry for Mental Health in the Church with a particular focus on the Black church. So there are a couple of different ways you can get the book. If you want a signed copy of it, you can go to my website, drjessicabrown.com. If you don't care if it's signed or not, you can go to Amazon, get paperback or Kindle. You can order it from the publisher website, www.judsonpress.com. It's an easy read. And it's really, I tried to make it so it's accessible to everybody. So it's not just for ministers or professionals. If you know nothing about mental health, you can start with the book. And we really use Jesus as a model, his conversation with the Samaritan woman at the well, as a model for what it means to just let everybody know that they can come and be healed, that God is accessible to all of us. So certainly check out the book. You could also follow me on social media. I'm Dr. Jessica Brown on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.
All right. Well, I hope you do it. I have my copy. I was blessed by it, and I know you'll be blessed by it. And
Amen.
I was
Amen.
blessed by our conversation today, Dr. Brown. So I appreciate you. I thank God for your ministry and what you're doing to serve his people. So hopefully, I'll have you back on the show again in the future. But
Sounds great.
until then, keep doing this great work. And we're going to continue here with Faith on the Journey, diving deep into this conversation around shame and condemnation. And for this month only, we have a special. We have a 20% off sale that we're running for our course on shame and condemnation. And so you can get that by going to faithonthejourney.org. Again, that's faithonthejourney.org. And there you'll find a bunch of other resources there for you. We have podcasts, blog posts. We have that free grief resource guide that I was telling you about. And you can also pick up a copy of my book, Breaking the Power of the Mask. So please check out the ministry website and just be a part of this community. And we look forward to continue to grow in this conversation next week, same time at 6 p.m. at Facebook Live and YouTube. And we'll also be sharing this on a podcast as well for those of you who like listening. So we can't wait to see you next week. But again, thank you so much for tuning in and being a part of this community. We love you, we care for you, and what's most important is God loves you. So you stay encouraged, keep your faith on your journey. We'll see you next week. Take care, everybody.